Chapter 30. The next day was Zigzag's birthday. Or he said Zigzag lay in his cot, everyone headed outside. I get to sleep in because it's my birthday. Then a little while later, he cut in the breakfast line just in front of Squid. Squid told him to go to the end of the line. Hey, it's my birthday, Zigzag said, staying where he was. It's not your birthday, said Magnet, who was standing behind Squid. It's too, said Zigzag. July 8th. Stanley was behind Magnet. He didn't know what the day of the week it was, let alone the date. It could have been July 8th, but how did Zigzag know? Try to figure out how long he'd been at Camp Green Lake. If indeed it was July 8th, I came here on May 24. He said aloud, that means I've been here 46 days. Said Zero. Stanley was still trying to remember how many days were in May and June. He looked at Zero. He learned not to doubt him when it came to math. 46 days, it felt more like 1,000. He didn't dig a hole on that first day. He hadn't dug one yet today. That meant he had dug 44 holes. And if it was July 8th. Can I have an extra carton of juice? Zigzag asked Mr. Sir. It's my birthday. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Sir gave it to him. Stanley dug his shovel into the dirt. Hole number 45. The 45th hole is the hardest, he said to himself. But that wasn't really true. And he knew it itself. He was a lot stronger than when he first arrived. His body had adjusted to somewhat the heat and harsh conditions. Mr. Sir was no longer depriving with water. After having to get by on less water for a week or so, Stanley felt like he had all the water he could want. Of course, it helped that Zero dug some of his hole for him each day, but it wasn't great as everyone thought it was. He always felt awkward while Zero was digging his hole, unsure of what to do with himself. Usually he stood around the sun beating down on him. It was better than digging, but not a lot better. When the sun came to a couple of hours later, Stanley looked for the thumb of God. The mountains were little more than dark shadows on the horizon. He thought he could make out a spot where the top of one of the mountains seemed to jut upwards, but it didn't seem very impressive. A short while of time later, the mountains were no longer visible, hidden behind a glare of sun. The sun reflecting off the dirty air. It was possible, he realized, that he found was then she meant to have lived here somewhere around here. If that was really her lipstick tube he found, then she must have lived somewhere around here. Zero took his turn before the lunch break. Stanley climbed out of his hole. Zero climbed back down into it. Hey, caveman, said Zigzag, you should get a whip. Then if your slave doesn't dig fast enough, you can crack it across his back. He's not my slave, said Stanley. We have a deal, that's all. A good deal for you, said Zigzag. It was Zero's idea, not mine. Don't you know, Zig? Said X-Ray, coming over. Caveman's doing Zero a big favor. Zero likes to dig holes. He charters the night sky to let Zero dig his hole for him, said Squid. Well, what about me? Asked Armpit. I like to dig holes too. Can I dig for you, Caveman? After Zero's finished, the other boys laughed. No, I want to, said Zigzag. It's my birthday. Stanley tried to ignore them. Zigzag Cat added. Come on, Caveman. Be a pal. Let me dig your hole. Stanley smiled, as if they were all a big joke. When Mr. Pendeski arrived with water and lunch, Zigzag offered his place in line. Since you're better than me. Stanley remained where he was. I didn't say I was better. You're insulting him, Zig, said X-Ray. Why should Cave and take your place? Then he deserves to be at the very front? He's better than all of us, aren't you, Caveman? No, said Stanley. Sure you are, said X-Ray. Now come on to the front of the line where you belong. That's okay, said Stanley. No, it's not okay, said X-Ray. Get up here. Stanley hesitated, then moved to the front of the line. Well, this is a first, Mr. Pendesky said, coming across the side of the truck. He filled Stanley's canteen and handed in a sack of lunch. Stanley was glad to get away. He sat down between his hole and Zero's. He was glad he'd be digging his own hole for the rest of the day. Maybe the other boys would leave him alone. Maybe he shouldn't let Zero dig his hole for him anymore. But he needed to save his energy to be a good teacher. He did bit into a sandwich. It contained some kind of meat and cheese mixture that came in a can. Just about everything at Camp Green Lake came in a can. The supply truck came once a month. He glanced up to see Zigzag and Squid walking towards him. I'll give you my cookie if you let me dig my hole, said Zigzag. Dig your hole. Squid laughed. Here, take my cookie, said Zigzag, holding it out for him. No, thanks. Come on, take my cookie, said Zigzag, sticking it at his face. Leave me alone, said Stanley. Please eat my cookie, said Zigzag, holding it under Stanley's nose. Squid laughed. Stanley pushed it away. Zigzag pushed him back. Don't push me. I didn't. Stanley got to his feet. He looked around. Mr. Pendesky was filling Zero's canteen. Zigzag pushed him again. I said, don't push me. Stanley took a step backwards, careful avoiding Zero's hole. Zigzag kept after him. He shoved Stanley and said, Quit pushing! Lay off, said Armpit as he, Magnet, and X-Ray joined them. Why should he? Snapped X-Ray. Caveman's bigger. He can't take care of himself. I don't want any trouble, Stanley said. Zigzag pushed him hard. Eat my cookie, he said. Stanley was glad to see Mr. Pendesky coming towards them, along with Zero. Hi, Mom, said Armpit. We were just fooling around. I saw what was going on, Mr. Pendesky said. He turned to Stanley. Go ahead, Stanley, he said. Hit him back. You're bigger. He stared at Mr. Pendesky in astonishment. Teach the bully a lesson, said Mr. Pendesky. Zigzag hit Stanley on the shoulder with his open hand. Teach me a lesson, he challenged. Stanley made a feeble attempt to punch Zigzag. Then he felt a flare of fists against his head and neck. Zigzag had hold of his collar with one hand and was hitting him with the other. The collar ripped and Stanley fell backwards into the dirt. That's enough, Mr. Pendesky yelled. It wasn't enough for Zigzag. He jumped on top of Stanley. Stop! Shouted Mr. Pendesky. The side of Stanley's face was placed flat against the dirt. He tried to protect himself, but Zigzag's fists slammed off arms and pounded his face onto the ground. All he could do was wait for it to be over. Then suddenly, Zigzag was off of him. Stanley managed to look up, then Zero had his arms around Zigzag's long neck. Zigzag made a gagging sound as he distractedly prized Zero's arm off him. You're gonna kill him, shouted Mr. Pendesky. Zero kept squeezing. Armpit charged into them, freeing Zigzag from Zero's chokehold. The three boys fell to the ground from different directions. Mr. Pendesky fired his pistol into the air. Other counselors came running from the office. The 10th hour out on the lake. They had their guns drawn, but hostlers were hostile them when they saw the trouble was over. The warden walked over from her cabinet. There was a riot, said Mr. Pendesky told her. Zero almost strangled Ricky. The warden looked at Zigzag, who was still stretching and massaging his neck. Then she turned her attention to Stanley, who was obviously in the worst condition. What happened to you? Nothing. It wasn't a riot. Ziggy had been beating up Caveman, said Armpit. Then Zero started choking Zigzag, and I had to pull Zero off Zigzag. It was all over before Mom fired her gun. They just got a little hot, that's all, said X-Ray. You know how it is. The sun all day, people get hot, right? Everything's cool now. I see, the warden said. She turned to Zigzag. What's the matter? Did you get a puppy for your birthday? Zig's a little hot, said Zigzag. Out in the sun all day, you know how it is. The blood started to boil. Is that what happened, Zigzag? Said the warden. Yeah, said Zigzag. Like X-ray said. Working so hard in the hot sun while cavemen just sitting around doing nothing, my blood boiled. Excuse me, said the warden. Caveman digs his holes just like everyone. Zigzag shrugged. Sometime, excuse me, Zero been digging part of a caveman's hole every day, said Squid. Warden looked from Squid to Stanley to Zero. I'm teaching him how to read and write, said Stanley. It's sort of a trade. The hole still gets dug, so what's the matter? Who digs it? Excuse me, said the warden. Isn't it more important for him to learn and read? Stanley asked. Doesn't that build character more than digging holes? That's his character, said the warden. What about your character? Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. The warden turned to Zero. Well, Zero, what have you learned so far? Zero said nothing. Have you just been digging Caveman's hole for nothing? The warden asked him. He likes to dig holes, said Mr. Pendusky. Tell me what you learned yesterday, said the warden. Surely you can remember that. Zero said nothing. Mr. Pendusky laughed. He picked up a shovel and said, You might be, to teach a shovel to read. It's got more brains than Zero. The at sound, said Zero. The at sound? Repeated the warden. Well, then tell me, what does cat spell? C-A-T spell. Zero glanced around uneasily. Stanley knew he knew the answer. Zero didn't like answering questions. Cat, Zero said. Mr. Pendusky stabbed his hands. Bravo, bravo! The boy is a genius. F-A-T? The warden. Zero thought for a moment. Stanley hadn't taught him the sound yet. Fat? Fat? How about H-A-T? Asked the warden. Stanley hadn't taught him the H sound either. Zero concentrated, then said, Chat? The counselor laughed. He's a genius, all right, said Mr. Pendusky. He's so stupid. He doesn't know he's stupid. Stanley didn't know what Mr. Pendusky seemed to have it for Zero. If Mr. Pendusky only thought about it, he realized it was very logical for Zero to think it was the letter H that made the CH sound. Okay, from now on, I don't want anyone digging anymore else's hole, said the warden, and no more reading lessons. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Good, the warden said, turned Stanley. You know why you're digging holes? Because it's good for you. It teaches you a lesson. If Zero digs your hole for you, you're not learning a lesson, are you? I guess not, Stanley mumbled, although he knew that digging to learn a lesson. She was looking for something that belonged to Kissing Kate Barrow. Why can't I dig my own hole but still teach Zero how to read? What's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that, the warden said. It leads to trouble. Zero almost killed Zigzag. It's cause him stress, said Mr. Pendusky. I know you mean well, Stanley, but face it, Zero's too stupid to learn. Learn to read. That's what makes his blood boil, not the hot sun. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Mr. Pendusky handed him the shovel. Here, take it, Zero. It's all you'll ever be good for. Zero took the shovel, and he swung it like a baseball bat. The metal bait smashed across Mr. Pendusky's face. His knees crumbled beneath him. It was unconscious before he hit the ground. The bouncers all drew their guns. Zero held a shovel in front of him as he was going to try and bat away the bullets. I hate digging holes, he said. Then he slowly backed away. Don't shoot him, said the warden. Can't go anywhere. The last thing we need is an investigation. Zero kept backing off, out past the clusters of the holes boys had been digging. Then farther and farther out on the lake. He's going to have to come back for water, the warden said. Stanley noticed Zero's canteen lying on the ground near his hole. A couple of counselors had Mr. Pendeski to his feet and into the truck. Stanley looked out toward Zero. He had disappeared into the haze. The warden ordered the counselor to turn guarding the shower room and the rec room all day and all night. They're not to let Zero drink any water. Then he returned. He was be brought directly to her. She examined her fingernails and said, "It's almost time for me to paint my nails again." Before she left, she told the 6 remaining members of Group D that she still expected 7 holes. Stanley angrily dug his shovel into the dirt. He was angry at everyone, Mr. Pendeski, the warden, Zigzag, X-ray, and no good dirty rotten pig stealing great-great-grandfather. But mostly he was angry at himself. He knew that she shouldn't have let Zero dig part of his hole for him. He still could have taught him to read. If Zero did part of a hole for him, he still could have taught him to read. If Zero could have dig all day and still have the strength to learn, then he should be able to dig all day and still have the strength to teach. What he should do, he thought, was go out after Zero. But he didn't. None of the others helped him dig Zero's hole, and he didn't expect them to. Zero had been helping him dig his hole. Now he had to help dig Zero's. He remained out of the lakes, digging the hottest part of the day, long after everyone else had gone in. He kept an eye out for Zero, but Zero didn't come back. It would have been easy to go out after Zero, but there was nobody to stop him. He kept thinking what he should do. Maybe they could climb to the top of the Big Thumb. There his grandfather found a refuge, and if 100 years ago or so, water was still there. It didn't seem likely, not when an entire lake had gone dry, and even if they did find a refuge on the Big Thumb, he thought, they still have to come back here eventually. Then they both had to face the warden and her rattlesnake fingers. Instead, he came up with a better idea, although he didn't have quite all figured it out yet. He thought maybe he could make a deal with the warden. He'd tell her where he really found the gold tube if she wouldn't scratch Zero. He wasn't sure how he'd make this deal without getting himself in deeper trouble. She might just say, "Tell me where X-ray," would get in trouble too. She'd probably scratch him up as well. X-ray would be out to get him for the next 16 months. He dug his shovel into the dirt. By the next morning, Zero still hadn't returned. Stanley saw one of the counselors sitting guard by the martyr sick pot out of the shower wall. Mr. Pendeski had 2 black eyes and a bandage over his nose. "I always knew he was stupid," Stanley heard him say. Stanley was required to dig 1 hole the next day. As he dug, he kept the constant watch out for Zero, but he never saw him. Once again, he considered going out on the lake to look for him, but he began to realize it was already too late. His only hope was Zero had found the God's Thumb on his own. It wasn't impossible. His great-grandfather had found it. For some reason, his great-grandfather had felt the urge to climb the mountain. Maybe Zero would feel the same urge. If it was the same mountain, the water was still there. He tried to convince himself it wasn't impossible. There had been a storm just a few days ago. Maybe the Big Thumb was some kind of natural water tower that caught and stored the rain. It wasn't impossible. He returned to his tent to find the warden, Mr. Sir, and Mr. Pendeski all waiting for him. "Have you seen Zero?" the warden had asked him. "No." "No signs of him at all?" "No." "Do you have any idea where he went?" "No." "You know you're not doing him any favors if you're lying." said Mr. Sir. "He can't survive out there for another day or two. I don't know where he went." All three stared at Stanley, as if they were trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Mr. Pendeski's face was so swollen he could barely open his eyes. They were just silts. "You sure he has no family?" the warden asked Mr. Pendeski. "He's a ward of the state," Mr. Pendeski told her. "He was living on the street when he was arrested." "Is there anyone who might ask questions? Some social workers who took an interest in him?" "He had nobody," said Mr. Pendeski. "He was nobody." The warden thought a moment. "Okay, I want you to destroy all of his records." Mr. Pendeski nodded. "He was never here," said the warden. Mr. Sir nodded. "Can you get into the state files on your computer?" she asked. "I don't want to see anyone in the AG's files to know he was here. I don't think I can erase him completely from all the state files. There's too many cross-references, but I can make it so that it would be very difficult for everyone to see a find of record for him. Like I said, though, no one will ever look. No one cares about Hector Zeroni." "Good," said the warden. 2 days later, a new kid was assigned to Group D. His name was Brian, but X-ray called him Twitch because he was always fidgeting. Twitch was assigned to Zero's bed and Zero's crate. Vaccines don't last long at Camp Green Lake. Twitch had been arrested for stealing a car. He claimed he could break into a car, disconnect the alarm, and hotwire the engine, all in less than a minute. Never planned to, steal one. But sometimes, I'll be walking past a real nice car parked in a deserted area, and I'll just start twitching. If you think I twitch now, you should see me when I'm around the car. Next thing I know, I'm behind the wheel." Stanley lay on his scratchy sheets. It occurred to him that his cot was no longer smelled bad. He wondered if the smell had gone away, if he just had gotten used to it. "Hey, caveman," said Twitch, "do you really have to get up at 4:30? "You get used to it," Stanley told him. "It's the coldest part of the day." He tried not to think about Zero. It was too late. Either he made it to Big Thumb, or that worried him the most. However, wasn't that if it was too late? What worried him the most wasn't really at his insides, was the fear that it wasn't too late. What if Zero was still alive, desperately crawling through the dirt, searching for water? He tried to force the image out of his mouth. The next morning, out on the lake, Stanley listened to Mr. Stir Twitch the requirements of his hole, as wide and as deep as your shovel. Fidget, fidget. His fingers drummed against the wooden shaft of his shovel, and his neck moved from side to side. "You won't be twitching so much after digging all day," Mr. Sir told him. "You won't have the strength to wiggle your pinky." He popped the sunflower seeds into his mouth, definitely chewed them, and spat out the shells. "This isn't a Girl Scout camp." The water truck came shortly after sunrise. Stanley got in line behind Magnet, ahead of Twitch. What if it's not too late? He watched Mr. Sir fill X-ray's canteen. The image of Zero crawling on the hot, dry dirt remained in his head. But what could he do about it? Even if Zero was somehow alive after more than 4 days, how would Stanley ever find him? It would take days. He needed a car, or a pickup truck with a water tank on the back. Stanley wondered if Mr. Sir had left the keys in the ignition. He slowly walked back away from the line, circled over to the side of the truck. He looked through the window, and the keys were there, dangling in the ignition. Stanley felt his fingers start to twitch. He took a deep breath to steady him and tried to think clearly. He had never driven before. How hard could it be? This is really crazy, he told himself. Whatever he did, he knew he had to be quickly before Mr. Sir noticed. It was too late, he told himself. Zero couldn't have survived. What if it wasn't too late? He took another deep breath. Think about it, he told himself, but there wasn't enough time to think. He flung open the door of the truck and climbed in quickly inside. He shouted, Mr. Sir. He turned the keys and stepped on the gas pedal. The engine revved. The truck didn't move. He pressed the pedal on the floor. The engine roared, but the truck was motionless. Mr. Sir came running around the side of the truck. The door was still open. Pull in the gear, shouted Twitch. The gear shifted was on the door next to the seat. Stanley pulled the lever back until the arrow pointed to the letter D for drive. The truck lurched forward. Stanley jerked back against the seat, tightly gripped against the wheel as the truck accelerated. His foot was pressed to the floor. The truck went faster and faster across the dry lake bed. It bounced over a pile of dirt, then Stanley was slammed forward instantly backwards as an airbag blowed backwards in his face. He fell out the door and opened to the ground. He had driven straight into a hole. He lay on the dirt staring at the truck, which stuck loop-sided into the ground. He sighed. He couldn't blame his no-good, dirty, rotten pig stealing great-great-grandfather for this time. This time it was his fault. 100%. He had probably done the stupidest thing he had ever done in his short, miserable life. He managed to get to his feet. He was sure, but he didn't have any broken bones. He glanced back at Mr. Sir, who remained where he was staring at Stanley. He ran. His canteen was strapped around his neck. It banged against his chest as he ran. Every time it hit against him, it reminded that it was empty, empty, empty. He slowed to a walk. As far as he could tell, nobody was chasing him. He heard voices coming from the back by the truck, but he couldn't make out the words. Occasionally he heard the revving of the engine, but the truck wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. He headed in what he thought was a direction of Big Thumb, but he couldn't see it through the haze. Walking helped calm him down and allowed him to think clearly. He doubted that he could make it to Big Thumb, and with no water in his canteen, he didn't want to risk his life on hope he found a refuge there. He'd have to return to camp. He knew that, but he was in no hurry. It would be better to return later after everyone had the chance to calm down, and as long as he come this far, maybe he might as well look for Zero. He decided he would go on as long as he could until he was too weak to go any farther, and then he'd turn back around and go back. He smiled as he realized that wouldn't quite work. He would only go halfway as far as he thought he could go, so that he thought he still had the strength to return. Then he made a deal with the warden to tell her where she found the Kate Marlowe restrict tube and begged for mercy. He wasn't surprised by how far out the holes extended. He couldn't see the camp compound anymore, but he still kept passing holes. Just when he thought he'd passed the last holes, it came across another cluster of them, farther away. Back at the compound, they had dug a symmetric order, row upon row, allowing space for the rotor truck. But out here, there was no system. It was every once in a while, in a fit of frustration, the warden would just pick a spot random and say, "What the hell, dig here?" It was like trying to guess winning numbers in a lottery. Stanley found himself looking down into each hole as he passed. Didn't admit to himself he was looking for. After more than an hour had gone by, he thought he had surely seen the last hole. But then off to the left, he saw another cluster of them. He didn't actually see the holes. He saw the mounds of dirt surrounded them. He stepped over the mounds and looked into the first hole. His heart stopped. Down at the bottom was a family of yellow-spotted lizards. Their large eyes looked up at him. He leapt back at the mound and ran. He didn't know if they were chasing him. He thought he might have seen one leapt out of the hole. He ran until he couldn't run any farther, and he collapsed. They hadn't come after him. He sat there a while and catch his breath. As he got to his feet, he noticed something on the ground. Maybe 50 yards away. It didn't look like much. It looked like a big rock in the land of nothingness, and a little seemed unusual. He walked slowly to encounter the lizard had made him very cautious. It turned out to be an empty sack of sunflower seeds. He wondered if it was the same one Magnet had stolen from Mr. Sir, but that didn't seem likely. He turned it inside and found one seed stuck into the burlap. Lunch. Chapter 34. The sun was almost directly overhead. He figured he could walk for no more than an hour, maybe 2, before he had to turn back. It seemed pointless. He could see there was nothing ahead of him, nothing but emptiness. He was hot, tired, hungry, and most of all, thirsty. Maybe he would just turn around now. He had already gone halfway, and he didn't know it. Then, looking around, he saw a pool of water less than 100 yards away from here, where he was standing. He closed 100 yards. He wasn't imagining it. The pool was still there. He hurried towards it. The pool was hurried away from him, moving as he moved, stopping when he stopped. There wasn't any water. It was a mirage caught by the shimmering waves of the heat rising up in the dry ground. He kept walking. He still carried the empty sack of sunflower seeds. He didn't know if he might find something to put in it. After a while, he thought he could make it out to the shape through the mountain haze. At first, he wasn't sure if there was another kind of mirage, but the farther he walked, the clearer they came into view. Almost straight ahead of him, he could see what looked like a fist, with its thumb sticking out. He didn't know how far it was away. 5 miles? 50 miles? One thing was certain. It was more than halfway. He kept walking towards it, although he didn't know why. He knew he had to turn around before he got there. But every time he looked at it, it seemed to encourage him, giving him the thumbs up sign. As he continued walking, he became aware of a large object on the lake. He couldn't tell what it was. As he continued walking, he became aware of a large object on the lake. He couldn't tell what it was, or even if it was natural or man-made. It looked a little like a fallen tree, although it didn't seem likely a tree would grow here. More likely, it was a ridge of dirt or rocks. The object, however, it was not on the way to the big thumb, but off to the right. He tried to decide where to go, to continue towards the big thumb, or maybe just turn around. There was no point in heading towards the big thumb. He decided he would never make it. For all he knew, it was like chasing the moon. But he could make it to the mysterious object. He changed directions. He doubted it was anything, but the fact that was there was something in the middle of all this made nothing hard for him to pass up. He decided to make the object his halfway point, and he hoped that he hadn't already gone too far. But he laughed to himself when he saw what it was. It was a boat, or part of a boat anyway. It struck him to see a funny boat in the middle of the dry, barren wasteland. But after all, he realized this was once a lake. The boat lay upside down, half buried in the dirt. Maybe somebody had drowned here. It grimly at the same spot where he would very well die of thirst. The boat name had been painted on the back. The upside-down letters were peeled and faded, but Stanley could read the name, Mary Lou. On one side of the boat, there was a pile of dirt and a tunnel leading down below the boat. The tunnel looked big enough for a good-sized animal to crawl through. He heard a noise. Something stirred under the boat. It was coming out. "Hey!" Stanley shouted. hoping to scare it back inside. His mouth was very down. It was hard to shout very loudly. "Hey!" the thing answered weakly. Then a dark hand on an orange leaf worked out of the tunnel. Zero's face looked like a jack-o'-lantern that had been left out many days past Halloween, half rotten and half shrunk and a dropping smile. "Is that water?" he asked. His voice was weak and graspy. His lips were so pale they were almost white, and his tongue seemed to flop usually in his mouth as he spoke. "Getting it out of the way." "It's empty," said Stanley. He stared at Zero, not believing that he was real. "I tried to bring you to the whole water truck, but," he smiled sleepily, "I drove into a hole. I can't believe you're me neither," said Zero. "Come on, we gotta get back to camp." "I'm not going back." "You have to. We both have to." "Want some sploosh?" Zero asked. "What?" Zero shaded his eyes with his forearm. "It's cooler under the boat," he said. Zero watched Zero crawl back through his hole. It was a miracle he was still alive, but Stanley knew he would have to get him back to camp soon, or he had to carry him. He crawled after him. He was just able to squeeze his body through the hole. He never would have fit when he first came to Camp Green Lake. He lost a lot of weight. As he pulled himself through, his leg got stuck on something sharp and hard. It was a shovel. For a second, Stanley had wondered how it got here. Remember that Zero had taken it with him after striking with Mr. Pendeski. It was cooler under the boat, which was half buried in the dirt. There were enough cracks and holes in the bottom of the boat, now the roof, to provide light and ventilation. He could see empty jars scattered around. He held a jar in his hand and tried to screw the lid. "What is it?" "Sploosh!" His voice was strained as he worked on the jar. "That's what I called it. They were buried under the boat. Still couldn't get the lid off. I found 16 jars. Here, hand me the shovel." Stanley didn't have a lot of room to move. He reached behind him. He grabbed the wooden end of the shovel and held it into Zero, blade first. "Sometimes you have to," Zero said. He hit the jar against the blade of the shovel, breaking the top of the jar clean off. He quickly brought the jar to his mouth and licked the sploosh off the jagged edges before it spilled. "Careful," Stanley warned. Zero picked up the cracked lid and splooshed off that as well. Then he handed the broken jar to Stanley. "Drink some." Stanley held it in his hand, stared at it for a moment, and he was afraid of the broken glass, but he was also afraid of the sploosh. It looked like mud, whatever it was. He realized it must have been on the boat where he sank. That meant it was probably over 100 years old. Who knew what kind of bacteria be living in it? "It's good," said Zero, encouraging him. It wondered how Zero had heard of bacteria. He raised the jar onto his mouth and carefully took a sip. It was warm, bubbly, and mushy nectar, sweet and tangy. It felt like heaven as it flew over his dry mouth and down his parched throat. He thought it might have been some kind of fruit at some time, perhaps peaches. Zero smiled at him. "I told you it was good." Stanley didn't want to drink too much. It wasn't good to resist. They passed the jar back and forth until it was empty. "How many are left?" "None." Stanley's mouth dropped. "Now I have to take you back." "I am not digging any more holes," said Zero. "They won't make you dig," Stanley promised. "They'll probably send you to the hospital, like Barfbag." "Barfbag stepped on a rattlesnake," said Zero. Stanley remembered how he had almost done the same. "I guess he didn't hear the rattle." "Did it on purpose," said Zero. "You think?" He took off his shoe and sock first. Stanley shivered as he imagined it. "What's Mary Lou Ho?" asked Zero. "What?" Zero considered hard. "Mary Yahoo Lou? I have no idea." "I'll show you," said Zero. Crawled back from under the boat. Stanley followed. Back outside, he had shielded his eyes from the brightness. Zero had walked to the back of the boat. He pointed to the upside-down letters. "Miriam Lou?" "Mary Lou." It was the name of the boat. "Mary Lou," Zero repeated, studying the letters. "I thought Y made a U sound." "It does, but when it's at the end of a word. Sometimes Y is a vowel and sometimes it's a consonant. Zero suddenly groaned. He jabbed his stomach all over. Are you alright? Zero dropped to the ground. He lay on his side, with his knees buckled to his chest. He continued to groan. Stanley watched helplessly. He wondered if it was the sploosh. He looked back to Camp Green Lake. At least he thought it was the direction of Camp Green Lake. He wasn't entirely sure. Zero stopped moaning, and his body slowly unbent. I'm taking you back, said Stanley. Zero managed to sit up. He took several deep breaths. Look, I've got a plan so you don't get in trouble, Stanley assured him. Remember when I found the gold tube? Remember when I gave it to X-Ray? The wardens went crazy and made us dig where she thought X-Ray had found it. I think if I tell the warden if I actually found it, I think she'll let us off. I'm not going back, Zero, said Zero. You've got nowhere else to go, said Stanley. Zero said nothing. You'll die out here, said Stanley. Then I'll die out here. Stanley didn't know what to do. He had come to rescue Zero and instead drank the last of his sploosh. He looked off into the distance. I want to you to look at something. I just want you to look up to see the mountain up there. The one that was something sticking out of it? Yeah, I think. What do you think? What does it look like you? Does it look like anything? Zero said nothing. But he studied the mountain. His right hand slowly formed into a fist. He raised his thumb. His eyes went from the mountain to his hand, back to the mountain. Chapter 36. This is the end of the video. Bye!